Welcome in to Check the Mic. Steve Palazzolo, Sam Monson. We're live on YouTube, Thursday edition, and real excited here, Sam, because we've got three of our friends here. Three friends in the draft community. We get to get other takes. We've been talking for 25, 30 hours of draft coverage. It's now time for Trevor Sikkema from PFF. Find out about the draft board. We get Danny Kelly from The Ringer and Lance Zierlein from NFL.com.
Yeah, this is exciting. I think first time Trevor's been on the new show, right? Since we left PFF. Yep. It'll be a first for Danny Kelly as well. And then I think we've spoken to Lance Zierlein maybe once before in the past, but certainly a long time ago. He's the guy that does all of the NFL profiles that you see if you dig into their prospect profiles online. So three great voices to bring on, I think.
And because we're an open book here, full disclosure, we did pre-record these. In fact, you weren't even there for Trevor. Right. I took care of that. So I do ask him about the draft board, and we get into some fun, just general draft discussion with Danny, with Lance. We hear about all of their favorite drafts, their least favorite drafts. They spoke a little bit more about their least favorite drafts, believe it or not. So we'll get into all that. Anything else you want to hit at the top? Or
yeah, just before we get into all of it, don't forget to hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. The numbers are cooking with all the draft content, with all of you guys coming on board and following along. So make sure you hit that subscribe button and let's get going.
All right, we're going to get to Trevor right now. Don't forget, Check the Mic Mondays and Thursdays going forward during the offseason, 9 a.m. Monday, 10:30 Thursday. Hit subscribe. Let's get right now to Trevor. All right, we are thrilled to be joined by Trevor Sikkema. First time on Check the Mic, Trevor. Welcome, PFF, NFL Stock Exchange. How you doing, man?
I'm doing good. I'm surprised it took this long. I think that's on me, actually, more than it is on you guys, because my schedule's wild before the draft. But here we go, a little post-draft coverage. So it's great to be with you, Steve.
Well, we were excited to get some different voices over here. People have gotten about 20-plus hours of Sam and I talking about the draft. So I wanted to get some slightly different takes here. So what, like, high-level takes, who are your favorite teams in the draft? Like, who won this draft for you here, Trevor?
The two highest grades that I have, since everybody loves draft grades, I gave the New England Patriots and the Carolina Panthers both A+. And I think what goes into an A+ is not only the players that you drafted, not only do I like the players that they drafted, the positions that they went after, the value they got versus my big board, but also what it takes to get more than just an A to an A+ is the total offseason. Like the NFL draft, of course, like draft grades, draft hauls, you want to talk about those things that I already mentioned, but at the end of the day, like it's a full offseason strategy. It's how you go about the guys who are currently on your roster, who you want to bring back, who you want to cut, how you prioritize free agency, how much money you're going to use on different positions and different players, how you're supplementing that with what you're going to do in the draft as well, potentially even in the trade market. And I look at the New England Patriots, Steve, I thought that they were the worst roster on paper in the NFL this past season, especially going into this offseason. And they had a terrible record because of it. They at least had Drake May, but this entire offseason was built around, okay, Mike Vrabel's getting in there. He's going to get his guys in. They made a lot of splashes in free agency on the defensive side of the football. And then I thought that they made some great splashes on offense as well. They draft Will Campbell, Jared Wilson, who I think are both going to be starters for them along that offensive line, really good starters. Kyle Williams, Travion Henderson, like both of those guys bring you more team speed and more dynamic ability on the offensive side of the ball. So I thought that those were all excellent picks from them. And then you've got defensive players that you added in free agency, and they got Braden Swinson in, what was it, like the 5th round or something? And it was probably my favorite pick of the draft when it comes to where I had him on my board versus where he ended up going. So love the Patriots, and I love the Panthers too. Same thing. They really hit defense hard in free agency. They didn't let that get in the way of them taking a player like Tetairoa McMillan at number 8, who I think totally changes this offense for the better. Because remember, it's not like Carolina just needed a wide receiver. Sometimes we'll put that on like a mock draft simulator or, in articles or whatever, and we go like, oh yeah, wide receivers a need for Carolina. Well, Carolina didn't need a wide receiver 2 or a wide receiver 3. They needed a wide receiver 1. And when were you going to get that? At the very top with the first wide receiver taken in this draft. So love Tetairoa McMillan for this team. And then I thought they got great value for Nick Scorton, Prince Human-Mielen. I think that Lathan Ransom can be a starter at safety for them. Trevor Etienne could potentially be RB2 for them for the long haul. Cameron Jackson's a great early down defender. So I thought both of those teams did an excellent job, not just in the draft, but also free agency and the just total offseason plan that they had. So they both got A+ for me.
when Sam and I were talking the best off seasons, we both mentioned the Bears and the Commanders and the Patriots, and you just mentioned the Panthers, and kind of looking at it in totality. And the common theme is that they all have rookie contract quarterbacks, so they had the ability to be aggressive with money. And the Commanders, in their case, it was more trades, but they were able to pay players, but also supplement their roster in the draft. So I think it's a good shout to just put it all together. And absolutely, like if you look at this Panthers and Patriots roster right now versus last year, it is night and day, completely different. I don't know how many new starters the Panthers are going to have, but with all they spent in free agency, there's a lot. And Patriots, it's the same thing. For you may have, by the way, just so you know, you may have caught a few strays here on our show, and it wasn't intentional. It was every time we were using the mock draft sim, we were wondering, we were theorizing, is this just Trevor's board? Are there any other voices in the room at PFF? So like when Omar Norman Lott is there as a first rounder, clearly you love him. Is that all you? Are there other voices? We just needed to get to the bottom of that, by the way, because you weren't catching strays. We were just like, look, this guy's a little higher, or Jalen Walker's a little bit lower than the consensus. And if the draft unfolded a certain way, maybe this player will be here or won't be here based off of what you had. So I need you to come clean on the PFF board this year.
So most of the PFF board was indeed me. And what we're doing, we did a little bit of this year going into next year, as well as one of my projects that I really wanted to do is sort of alleviate that very question. Because I think you guys aren't alone. There's a lot of people who look at the PFF big board and go like, okay, well, is this Trevor's? Is this like a stat? Like, is this like a PFF staff or whatever? Like, and this too. The MDS operates under my big board. So sometimes, right. I feel the pressure to, move a guy up or down just to make sure the MDS is flowing the way that it needs to. So the way that we wanted to alleviate that is we did team top 100s for every single team in the NFL. And that was a way for me to sort of get into this really, I think, detailed contextual view of a lot of these players, to where, I have players that I'm betting on if you just go over to pff.com, but also they might be higher, lower on team-specific grades. But the Omar Norman Lott one, that one is definitely me. Being a little bit lower on Jalen Walker, that was me. I'm a little bit lower on Nick Emanwari as well. So like him being a little bit further, I caught some crap for that. A lot of people were like, how does PFF have this player a little bit lower? And it's like, I don't know if he has a home base in the NFL. So
for the record, I don't care. I mean, do it. I mean, we used to build the big boards over there too. I used to be in charge of the boards over there, and I wanted to highlight the players I thought were going to be better. Of course, you have to do that, but when it's in the sim, it stands out more, and people are, and if it affects the results, that's the only question. So you weren't really catching strays. We just had to blame you though, and just say, here's the reason why we're scrolling too far for Jalen Walker or whatever it may have been. But I get it. But I had to get that clarified for our listeners.
I'll take the shrapnel this year. We're trying to make sure that the process is a little bit more straightforward and streamlined moving forward, to where we have an operational, more consensus board that we deal with when it comes to the MDS. But then you could also see my board as well as the team specific big boards too.
All right, so you gave me your two favorite. Sam and I were theorizing over the last couple of years that there just haven't been a whole lot of drafts that we don't love. I do want to get into the ones maybe you don't love as much, but do you feel like the NFL overall is doing a pretty good job of drafting, and you kind of at least get the strategy of the majority of the teams, and a lot of the results are pretty good, and it's tough to find like, oh, I'm just out on these 10 drafts. I feel like you don't have as many of those as maybe you used to.
No, I agree. I saw Sam's tweet about this, and I do agree with it. You don't see a lot of front offices that are just like, going totally crazier against consensus the way that you used to. We obviously have a handful of classes that I didn't love this year, and when we get into the classes that I don't love, I think that we will talk about that a little bit. For that team is a big reason why I didn't love them. But overall, I mean, it's funny because when I see somebody else post draft grades, right, for example, and it'll be like, oh, like here's this is what NFL.com like has as like draft grades for everybody. It's basically just like B's or A's. And it's like, all right, well, like, are we being too soft here? Like, do we need to be a little bit harsher towards some of these teams? But, and like,
because they work. Yeah, because they work for the NFL. There's reasons there,
So
right? Just like PFF has to tread that line, obviously, as well, because they're all clients, right? So that's why
So
I get it.
so there's a little bit about that, but sometimes I see that even with like non NFL partners as well. And I think
Yeah.
to you guys' point, there's just not a lot of drafts that like suck. There's just not a lot. I think that these teams understand what their coaching staff wants, and especially if they have like great synergy between the scouting staff, the front office, and the coaches. A lot of the like, for example, like the Chiefs, like the Chiefs barely have bad drafts. I can't remember the last bad Chiefs draft, and because even if it's not an A draft for the Chiefs, at the very least, it's a lot of guys who fit their scheme and I think fit with what they do. So I do agree with you guys. I just don't think there's a lot of drafts that are terrible.
All right. So which ones were you lower on though? Which drafts did not tickle your fancy here during the 2025?
Yeah, with that being said, the San Francisco 49ers draft was my least favorite draft of any team. This is the only draft that got a D from me, and they got a D minus. This is the lowest grade that I gave. I didn't quite give them an F because I still like the Alfred Collins and CJ West picks. I thought they were good value picks. I thought they were appropriate for what this team really needed. I thought it was a good identification of making sure the run defense is a lot better than what it was last year, because that was a big reason why they were as disappointing as they were. But with that being said, I'm not a big Mykel Williams guy. Mykel Williams was 38th overall on my big board. They drafted him 11th, so I have to take that into account. Nicholas Martin and Upton Stout, not only was Upton Stout drafted 100 spots ahead of where I had him on the big board, but Nicholas Martin was drafted 200 spots above where I had him on the big board. And both of those players are complete size outliers that you are drafting in the third round. If those were the last picks that they had of the draft, okay, maybe I get it. These are just your guys that you want to get on the team. But both of those players, 10th percentile, if not lower than the 5th percentile in height, weight, and length for the position. So you're heavily betting on major NFL outliers in the third round. I think they could have taken both of these players with their 5th round picks, let alone not just the 3rd round picks. So I understand the NFL draft is all about like going to get your guy, the guys that you think are going to fit on your team, but it's also about intel. It's also about making sure that you have an appropriate range on where a player is going to get drafted. And I thought those guys were well overdrafted versus where they could have got them later. I think the same about Jordan Watkins. I think the same about Marquise Siegel. And then you throw in the fact that they drafted Jordan James in the 5th, the running back out of Oregon, who I like Jordan James as a prospect. But to that point, you had not touched offensive line. And you need long-term answers at offensive tackle, and you need potential starters on the interior. So I don't love how they prioritize this draft. I don't like how they did not touch the offensive line at all whatsoever. And I thought there were major reaches at a lot of spots that they were taking from the 3rd round on. And I even think that their first selection of Mykel Williams was much higher than where he should have been selected. So this was my least favorite draft. The only 2 picks that I really think were solid for them were CJ West and Alfred Collins. I just straight up did not like the rest of their picks.
So the Niners had 11 picks, and the whole time during the pre-draft process, I said, look, this is a huge draft for the Niners. They just lost so much talent over the last couple of years, knowing that they have to kind of clear the decks for a Brock Purdy contract.
Right.
And they had been set up to pay several players 20 to 30 million over the last few years, right? In that, when you have several players over 20 million, it's because you're paying your quarterback like 700,000, right? And they had the best value quarterback in the entire NFL in Purdy. So they've cleared the decks. And I thought last year, they drafted pretty well. I thought they had a lull for a few years. Last year, they bounced back, probably have 4 or 5 legitimate starters and contributors from last year's draft. And I thought this year was huge. And I don't think you're on an island as far as people not loving the Niners draft, particularly when you have 4 picks in the first 3 rounds, and 2 of those 3s, as you said, picked a lot higher than I think at least the consensus had them, higher than you had them. So yeah, look, we'll see. As all of this is, hey, we'll see what happens. They might be right, but I get it, right? For a team that has 11 picks, I think we all maybe had a different picture in our head of what that could have looked like for the Niners, especially when it's 4 picks in the first 3 rounds, 6 in the top 4, and could have added a lot of talent. I didn't hate their day 3, but but I understand
Mm.
as far as the Niners go. Any other teams that just weren't your favorite here during this draft?
I didn't love what the Vikings did. And I think that this it's sort of a philosophical bad draft grade here too. I gave them either a C or a C minus. I can't remember exactly what I gave them, but this is a team that didn't have a lot of picks going in, right? They only had 4 selections going in. They end up making 5 selections in this draft. But most importantly, they didn't trade back from number 24. They drafted Donovan Jackson. Now, in a vacuum, they set up maybe the best offensive line in the NFL when they're all healthy. Between Christian Darrisaw, Brian O'Neill, now they have Donovan Jackson at guard. Now they also have Will Fries at guard and Ryan Kelly at center. Could be one of the best offensive lines in the NFL, which is very important for a guy who is essentially a rookie in J.J. McCarthy coming in to start for the first time. I understand that. But I do kind of wish they traded down. I don't know if they had to take Donovan Jackson there at number 24. Maybe they felt like they did, but I felt like there were other guards as well, which they could have picked and had a really solid starting 5. But you have to look at this situation, especially for Minnesota, and say, okay, they stuck at number 24 and drafted Donovan Jackson. The New York Giants traded with the team that picked right behind them, and they gave them 2 extra third-round picks to move up from 34 to 25 with the Houston Texans. And then you look at 1 pick after that, the Atlanta Falcons gave up a future first-round pick to move up to 26. And I don't know this for sure, but I got to believe both of those teams probably called the Vikings because everybody in the world went into this draft knowing that the Vikings were susceptible to moving back because they only had 4 picks left. So I have to imagine both of those teams called Minnesota and they would have said no to both of those trades to draft Donovan Jackson number 24. And even though, again, like I can kind of understand that, the part where I really don't like this draft is at 102 in the 3rd round, with a little bit of a trade back, they took Ty Felton. Why? I'm not the biggest Ty Felton fan anyways. I think he's fine. Even like from where he got picked, I have him ranked about 50 spots lower, but it's fine. We're talking about a mid-round pick anyways. But for the Vikings, you picked a player with your 2nd overall selection, of which you did not have many selections, and you took a complete luxury position of where you are already 3 deep anyways. So I didn't really love how the Vikings processed this entire draft. I felt like they should have traded back at 24. There were other guards to be able to get a little bit later, especially with the price tag that was being thrown around for them to move back not very far. They would have gotten extra picks in this draft, a little bit more premium picks. And then I just did not like that 3rd round selection of Ty Felton. I don't really think that it does anything for them. I like Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins. I like Kobe King. Those are good selections for them. But I just really don't like how the Vikings went about this draft.
We theorized the trade down seemed like a perfect fit for them on draft night, especially as you mentioned after the Texans traded down with the Giants, picked up the extra 2 threes. I do think Kwesi was a little worried about the guard run with Tyler Booker, Gray Zabel off the board. And I'm sure they debated it and said, we can get 2 extra threes and drop 10 spots. That's it. 2 extra threes. At least that's what the Giants gave the Texans. But they ended up just saying, we're just going to pick. Let's just make sure we get this left guard, solidify the offensive line. So, yeah, I see both sides of that with the Vikings. Got to tell you about 2 of our most popular teams, Browns and the Lions. But Browns in particular, what were your thoughts on the Browns draft? Obviously, a lot of drama, the Shedeur Sanders stuff, Dylan Gabriel, everything that they did, the trade down. What were your thoughts high level on what the Browns did?
Yeah, I think that people are going to be mad at me about this, and it's fine. I didn't love the Browns draft either. It felt very all over the place, and the Shedeur element goes into it, and I'll explain that in a second. I like Mason Graham as a player. He was one of my favorite players in this class. But even with being able to trade down and get, in my opinion, one of the top 5 players in the class at number 5, you get an extra 1st-round pick next year. I think that's good. Like in a vacuum, that is good. But I think Travis Hunter is special. I do. I've had him number 1 on my big board, wire to wire. I think that if any prospect is going to be generational in this class, which I hate using that term, but if any prospect is going to be generational, it's Travis Hunter. I have very high hopes for him. And with that being the case, it's hard for me to be okay with just trading that player away for a franchise that I think needs a major difference-making player. So even though they got Mason Graham in a 1st-round pick, I actually think it's a net negative as we stand here today, passing up on the player who I thought was without question the best player in this class. When it comes to the rest of their selections, I think that Carson Schlesinger was overdrafted a little bit at the top of the second round. I think he could be a good linebacker for them, but I think he's got a long way to go as somebody who had a lot of plus graded plays at PFF, but a lot of negative grades at PFF as well. So he's a very high variance linebacker, even though he has a lot of movement talent to him. Harold Fannin Jr., I think was overdrafted compared to where I had him in my board, but okay, that's a bet that you're making on a unique tight end talent. I actually love the running backs that they got. There's a great running back room now with Quinshaw Juggins and Dylan Sampson. But as we know, like running backs, you can kind of get those every single year. So I want to give them credit for that. I do love the running back room, but you also got to say that. And then in terms of how they went about the quarterbacks, drafting Dylan Gabriel in the third, I thought was an overdraft for what I think about Dylan Gabriel. I thought he was much more of a day 3 quarterback. And then 50 picks later, you take Shedeur Sanders. So it's almost hard for me to even give them credit for Shedeur Sanders because not only did they not take him where they took another quarterback at number 94, they didn't take him at 126 when they took another running back either. They took their second running back over taking Shedeur Sanders. So don't sit here and tell me like, oh, they navigated they played the game the right way. Like I don't even give them credit for this. I think this certainly smells a lot like somebody up top picking up the phone and saying, hey, you better draft this kid, rather than the front office and the coaching staff going about it in a way where they really liked him. Because if that was the case, they would have taken him at 94, and they certainly would have taken him at 126. So I just didn't love the Browns draft. I felt like the logic was all over the place. Some people can look at it and say, wow, they got Mason Graham and an extra first. That's excellent. If you want to lean into that and believe that.
And a second.
And a second. You're right.
That's where I go.
And a second.
It's 3 players for one.
And a second.
Right? It's Graham, a 1, and a high 2.
I get it. You're right. You are right. I needed to include that in there. I just don't love passing on Travis Hunter. I don't. I think that he is a one-of-a-kind football player. And even as somebody who often leans on, I'd rather have more darts to throw at the dartboard. This was one example where I went, I'd rather have Travis Hunter. I really would, because of especially what he might be able to do on both sides of the ball and the value that he could bring and just the overall franchise player that he was. So I know people don't love it, but I find myself more frustrated with the Browns draft than giving them credit for the way that they navigated things.
Really quick, just some high-level thoughts on the Lions, because we have so many Lions fans that love to watch. What are your thoughts on the Lions draft really quick?
Yeah, so the Lions, somewhere in the B range, B minus, B plus. I kind of like go, back and forth on this simply because I really like the Tyreek Williams draft. It was a little bit of an overdraft for where he was on my big board, but he fits exactly what the Lions do really well. Tate Ratledge does the same thing. I like that selection. The Isaac Tesla pick is complicated because they had a third, they traded up in the third, but in order to do that, they gave up 2 third-round picks next year to do so. I originally thought, okay, they're giving up 2 third-round picks, but they're going to get 1 back for the Aaron Glenn minority head coach hire, which the NFL gives you a third-round pick back. But then I learned that one of those third-round picks is actually the Aaron Glenn third-round pick. So they're not getting 1 kicked back there. They're losing both of their third-round picks next year. And even though I actually like Isaac Tesla, he was higher on my rankings than I think he was for a lot of other people out there, I just don't think they had to do it. And maybe he'll way outperform where I had him on the big board, and that sort of proves me wrong there. But Jalen Royals, you could have got at 102 where your original pick was. Elikai Omaner, you could have gotten at 102 where your original pick was. Pat Bryant was picked after Isaac Tesla as well, and that's sort of the same theme of where you wanted that player, although Tesla is more athletic than Pat Bryant, so I do kind of get that one, and they wouldn't have been able to pick Bryant at 102, so I think that context is important there. But other than that, Miles Frazier I love, Ahmed Hassanin I love, both culture fits, Dan Campbell type of players, as is Dane Jackson. I'm not the biggest Dominic Lovett fan, but it's pick 246, so that's not like that brings down the grade very much. I think it's probably somewhere in the B range, depending on how you view how much they gave up for Isaac Tesla. I think now that he is on the team, he is actually going to be a really good piece for them. So I kind of fluctuated a little bit, but ultimately I'd probably put it in the B plus range as my final grade for him.
Love it. Well, I appreciate it, Trevor. Thank you for joining us. Tell everybody where they can find all your stuff and what else do you have going on here during draft week?
Yeah, sure. PFF.com, the PFF YouTube channel as well. Obviously, your followers probably know that very well. So after they watch all of your fantastic videos, they can come back over to PFF and watch our videos over there, as well as the NFL Stock Exchange podcast, where we're not just talking about draft here this time. We'll even get into summer scouting here in a couple of weeks. And if you're big into the NFL draft and if you love the draft year round, come hang out with us over there on the NFL Stock Exchange show.
You will love the Stock Exchange. I tried to get Connor on this show too, but he's at the Derby this week. He's he's got stuff going on. He's being forced to go to the Derby to go record some shows, so he couldn't do it. So I'm just glad we got you at least from the stock exchange.
He lives a tough life, but somebody's got to do it. Somebody's got to bite the bullet and take some of those assignments in life.
Hey guys, I'd heard of Skims before, but was surprised to find out that they're now offering men's underwear, and we're here to tell you it's worth the hype. That's right, we are hyping up Skims for men. Here's what I don't like about underwear. It's not always fitting right, the waistband, it's not always comfortable, but I love Skims because they're comfortable, they're practical, the waistband isn't too tight, and look, we tested out both of their boxer briefs, the cotton, the stretch, cotton designed for day-to-day use, the stretch built for athletic performance, and I love the cotton Skims. They're my new go-to, Sam.
Yeah, we also had the option of the tidy whities if that's your thing, but it's very much not my thing. So I went with the cotton boxer briefs, and they are legit, absolutely the best pair of underwear that I currently own, and I'll have to be restocking some more.
All right, so you guys can go check them out. It's Skims Men at skims.com and Skims stores. You got to let them know we sent you. After you place your order, you select podcast in the survey, select our show, check the mic in the drop-down menu that follows. Skims is the official underwear partner of the NBA, WNBA, and USA Basketball, and of course, the official underwear partner of us at Check the Mic. So go check it out, skims.com, Skims stores, and be sure to select podcast and Check the Mic on your way out. All right, now we're excited to be joined by Danny Kelly, Ringer Fantasy Football and the NFL Draft Show. Danny, how you doing, man?
I'm doing great. Just trying to recover from a long draft process, but feeling good.
We are trying to squeeze as much out of it as we can, but people have heard us speak about the draft quite a bit, so we figured we'd get some other takes. So high level, let's start with this. I've been asking this question. Are you doing draft grades? Did you do draft grades? And
Yes.
Whether you do or not, how do you evaluate the drafts? What are you looking at? Do you care about your players, what teams did, their process? What are you evaluating with draft grades?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously when you're doing draft grades, you kind of have to use your personal rankings as sort of like a barometer of how you give draft grades, since you don't know exactly how things are going to go 5 years down the line. So that's kind of the way I approach it. Generally, just if I see something as a big reach, I try to include some process in there too. Like, generally speaking, not a huge fan of teams trading future first rounders for non-quarterbacks, things like that. Trying to use positional value a little bit, though. I'm kind of softening, honestly, on the running back thing. Just kind of get good players in the building and go from there. I'm starting to kind of be a NFL boomer like that. But yeah, generally speaking, process, obviously using my personal rankings as sort of a barometer of how to do this, and then try to have a little fun with it too.
Maybe that's what this is. We've been kind of softening on the anti-running back thing as well. And now look, since we've left PFF, right? I'm sure that's part of it as well.
Sure.
We're outside of the building where that was an agenda-driven thing. But maybe we're just getting old. Like maybe you just revert to your inner boomer, and all of a sudden you're going to be like, establish the run, play action.
Yeah.
I mean, Rick Drummond, our old colleague, he was, he's a Raiders fan. He's raising his son as a Raiders fan. And he goes, yeah, my son Noah really wants Ashton Genty because he wants his jersey. And it's like, no, tell him to get Membu and, build in the trenches. And it's a new regime. He's like, no, he's not going to get Membu's jersey. He wants Ashton Genty. So he was excited. Yeah. And so, we're all growing together and more accepting of running backs here in our old age. So it's good to know.
It's like a rite of passage, I think, in life. You know what I mean? It's once you pass a certain age, you're like, man, establishing the run really does work. It's one of those things. If you can't stop the run, you can't get off the field. These cliches start to really ring true. I don't know. But yeah, I'm starting to soften on that quite a bit.
So who did you like overall as far as drafts go? Favorite drafts and whatever else you want to talk. What were your favorite drafts here?
I think, my favorite draft was the Patriots, which I wasn't expecting to happen. But, I think just if you look at everything they did from start to finish, their day 3 stuff where they're drafting a long snapper and a kicker, you can get into that if you want. But I thought day 1 and 2, they drafted, just some smart, good players that they can plug right into their lineup. Will Campbell, obviously, I think they see him as a left tackle. I thought he should at least get a chance to play left tackle in the league. I know a lot of people have concerns about his wingspan and arm length, but I mean, it didn't really show up that much to me when I was watching him. Travion Henderson, I think, makes a ton of sense for them at running back. A good compliment to Ramondre Stevenson. Those first 2 picks are, let's protect our quarterback. And I think that just makes a lot of sense from a strategy point of view. And then Kyle Williams thought was a good value in the 3rd round. So, and then Jared Wilson too was a guy that I had in my head for my Seahawks, coming into the draft, and getting him in the 3rd round felt like a really good value for them as well. So I think, the Patriots just kind of hit it right down the fairway with all their picks. And I had 6 guys in my top 100 from their draft. So thought they did a really good job. I think that was just, my highest graded team. Actually, the only team I gave an A+ to.
When you're doing your draft grades, do you kind of consciously try and spread the range out from A+ down to something? Because are you familiar with that composite graphic that guy Rene Bugner puts out, where he's 25 guys on the big spreadsheet? You're like right down the middle in terms of average GPA relative to other people.
Yeah, I noticed that too. Yeah. I don't know if I go in automatically trying to do that, but yeah, try and grade a little bit. I don't know if that's grading on a curve or not, but try to save my A+ for the ones that I was like, man, they really did well in this one. And then, I don't usually go too far down in terms of D's and F's because for the most part, I like the players that these teams have taken, and you can kind of see what they're thinking in most cases. Anything super wacky or whatever. I think I downgraded the Lions in this one just because I think they were feeling themselves a little bit with that Tesla trade up. So I don't know, stuff like that. But yeah, I try to kind of start from a C range if it's just that was fine. And then if I really, really like what you're doing, go higher from there. But I did notice that when I looked at the draft grades, I'm right in the middle. I don't know if that's good or bad. Maybe it's bad.
But I feel like so I don't have anything against F's and D's philosophically, but I feel like those drafts don't happen anymore.
Right.
A few years ago, you used to get drafts where I would happily brand those things F's and D's. Now it's all right, there's a couple that I don't love, but not to the point where I would say this is definitely a fail grade of a draft.
Yeah, I'm the same way. In fact, I've been accused in my day of being too lenient as a drafter, so I'm trying to get a little bit harder on teams. But yeah, I mean, the same deal. Unless the team makes an absolutely egregious mistake process wise, at least what is viewed as a process, bad process. Trading their entire draft for a running back, probably, something like that back in the day with Ricky Williams. Something like that, probably garner an F, but for the most part, you can probably look at every draft class and be like, I understand what they're doing there. That fills a need for this, that, or the other. I didn't necessarily love the player, but I understand what they're doing. So yeah, I'm saving those Fs and D- for teams that really just mess it up really badly.
Now that we're so far removed from PFF and everything, I guess I could probably tell some of these stories, but the 2016 draft, we put a D on the Seahawks. That was the Jermaine Ifedi first round pick.
Oh, yeah.
And we gave an A to the Browns. And that was Corey Coleman. So it wasn't like that worked out, but the Browns had that big 12 picks or whatever it was. And we gave them an A and Seahawks D. Someone from the Seahawks texted me and was pissed. It was I bet we have more starters than the Browns. And we haven't talked much actually since then, but we haven't circled back on that one. I think we both lost because I don't think the Browns draft was great. I don't think the Seahawks draft was great.
I mean,
it was,
that era
since then, as far as the D's and F's goes as well.
Totally. That era. I mean, if you're looking at that 2016 draft, see Jaron Reed still with the team. I think he was gone for a minute, but he's back.
Yeah, he left for a bit and came back. That doesn't count.
But otherwise, man, rough draft. Quentin Jefferson, I think he played for a while in the league. Alex Collins played for a while in the league, but pretty much Jermaine Ifedi, CJ Prosise in the third round. That never did anything. Nick Vanette did nothing. Reese Odiambo did nothing. Joey Hunt did nothing. Kenny Lawler did nothing. Zach Brooks, I don't even remember him.
See?
So yeah, there we go.
And then the Browns had some useful players. They were just Emmanuel Ogbah and Joe Schobert. It was just later. It was Corey Coleman was terrible with 7 overall, whatever he was.
Yeah. I think the Seahawks, the story of the Seahawks is, and this is why I kind of I try not to get too high or too low on any individual team in terms of their ability to evaluate. It's I always kind of say it's a little bit like a stock picker where it's for a short amount of time, you can look really smart and you can be up on, compared to the S&P, 50% or whatever it is. But over the long term, most guys, most GMs are pretty average. You know what I mean? John Schneider, I think he drafted 3 or 4 Hall of Famers in his first couple drafts. And since then it's been pretty hit or miss. I really did like their draft this year. But I think GMs start to believe the legends on themselves and start to get a little bit crazy with what they do and think that they know everything. And that's why generally, and this is a process thing. It's make more picks, throw more darts. That'll probably work out for you in the end. Don't trade up too much unless you have like a guy that you really, really believe in. And even then you're probably wrong. So that's just kind of like, I've become a little bit of like I don't know what the word is, nihilist or something, where it's just like, man, just pick by the consensus. You're probably better off.
No,
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a powerful thing. That like Socratic idea of understanding that none of us know anything is
Right.
powerful. Like
Mm-hmm.
be self-aware enough to know that even if you got on a good run, this is not sustainable long term,
Yep.
and you're better off acting as if it didn't happen.
Right. There's just too many variables. I mean, these are human beings, 20-year-old human beings that are, there's just no telling how they're going to be, a couple of years from now in terms of work ethic, talent wise, like whether they develop in the system. There's just like a million variables. It's just like, I don't know. It's impossible.
That said, anyone else that you liked besides
Right.
the Patriots? Whose process and or picks did you like besides New England?
I thought the Panthers did pretty well with what they were doing. Obviously, I was a big fan of Ted McMillan coming in. T-Mac, I guess he doesn't really like to be called Ted, so I'll try and change that. But T-Mac, and then coming back in the second and third round, grabbing Nick Scorton, Princely, Uman, Milan. I like both of those picks. Mitchell Evans, and I think it was the 6th round or 5th round was an interesting pick for them. So I thought overall they did a really good job. I like the Giants draft. I wasn't like a huge fan of the Jackson Dart trade up, but at the very least, it didn't cost a lot for them. Like if a third this year, a third next year, to go up and get a guy that they could develop into their quarterback. Again, I wasn't like a huge Jackson Dart fan. I think I had him ranked like 40-something, 45th or 6th. But I understand from a process point of view, it's not costing you all that much to make that, to make that bet. There's been quarterbacks in recent years that I haven't been super high on, and they ended up being a lot better than I thought. Bo Nix is one of them. So maybe there is something here where they can develop him. I think he has some interesting tools for sure. But other than that, Abdul Carter, I love that pick. Darius Alexander, love that pick. I think their defensive line is going to be in contention for one of the best in the NFL this year. Cam Scatterbu in the 4th round is super fun for them. I think he could end up being a starter for them, even though he is certainly lacking in like long speed. I think he's got enough short area juice to be pretty productive for them. And then I really like the Marcus Mbo pick in the 5th round, I believe it was. I was another guy that I had ranked quite a bit higher. I think I had him in the 40s or 50s. So that was a huge steal for them. So overall, I like the Giants pick a lot, or overall just like their draft a lot.
Did you have a good player comp for Scatterbu? Because I got so mad at people even mentioning the name Mike Allstott next to him. It was really making me
the
upset.
worst one was Toby Gerhardt. That was the worst.
Oh my God. Yeah. So I think he's on the David Montgomery, Zach Moss spectrum. So somewhere in there, whether depending on how you feel about those guys, I think both of them were kind of known as being big time tackle breakers, very powerful runners, and have the ability to kind of like be the engine of the offense on early downs. But then, neither of them are running away from guys. They're getting caught from behind. I think David Montgomery has had a hard time kind of shedding his slow label his entire career, even though he's, I think, one of the better running backs in the league. Just from, he's just going to get yards for you. He's going to create for you. I think Scatterbu can do that. But I think like the low end range would be something like a Zach Moss, where he's a good number 2 to come in. If your lead guy gets hurt, he can carry the load for you, but high end would be like a guy like Montgomery. So somewhere in that,
I like that. That's
spectrum. Fair. Yeah.
Very fair. Not Mike Allstott.
Who was the guy that was on the cover of Madden one
Peyton
year
Hillis.
with the Brads?
Peyton Hillis.
Yeah, Peyton Hillis, maybe something like that. Rex
I
Burkhead.
tweeted this out. People got mad at just mentioning it. Like Peyton Hillis is a horrible stylistic comp for him, but I think just like Peyton Hillis, Scatterbu could be like he could make the cover of Madden next year by becoming that kind of like cult hero immediately.
Totally.
Him and Tommy Cutlets taking over New Jersey this offseason. Get Tommy on the practice squad. You got to keep him around for morale. Any drafts you didn't like, Danny? Who can we hate on here?
Well, I did mention, I think my lowest graded class was the Vikings. I don't know. They just didn't do a lot. And this is kind of one of those drafts where they traded up last year for Dallas Turner and lost a couple of picks. And so they had the 24th pick and then the 102nd pick. And so, obviously I just think from a volume and like getting really useful players point of view, I'm just like, they just didn't really knock it out of the park, and that's fine. I really did like Donovan Jackson, but they just didn't do a whole lot there. And then I mentioned the Lions. I just didn't love the value. I think overall they took good players. Tyreek Williams, I think, was considered more of like a second round type of prospect, just because right now he's more just of a run defender than a pass rusher, though he could develop in that area. But it was a very, very on brand pick, draft overall for the Lions. Just like grab some trench guys. Tate Ratledge has the Dan Campbell kind of, dirtbag look to him. Miles Frazier, I thought, was a good value for them, but like the Tesla pick, I just don't understand it, because from a purely process point of view, maybe he ends up being, a really good player for them. Maybe he ends up developing, and I just have to, put my foot in my mouth on this. But like from a process point of view, it's like a super athletic, low production receiver, and I think he's older and he's in his 5th year, and he's a former lower level competition guy that kind of transferred to the SEC and then didn't really do a whole lot. Process wise, what are we doing trading 2 future picks to go up and get this guy? He, from a profile point of view, that is a day 3 pick. You know what I mean? That is a day 3 receiver. That's typically, I understand that he's very athletic. But other than that, that's just kind of picking nits. You have to start picking nits with some of these picks, or else you're just going to have a bunch of B's and A's. So that to me was just like, process wise, didn't love that. But again, I don't really love the Lions process every year, and they're doing pretty well. So maybe this ends up being another case where they just pick guys that really, really fit in what they're doing and fit in their system. But it felt like they were feeling themselves a little bit with that one.
What did you make of Tesla, the player? Because it definitely raised eyebrows as well when they did that. And I think it was an overpay, but it was such a sort of aggressive move that it like clearly they have demonstrated that they believe that guy's a better player than like everyone else thinks he is, to the point where it immediately makes me go, okay, I'm going to go back and watch him again, because I didn't like him that much. And I went back and looked. And the more you watch him with sort of that in mind, you're like, I can kind of see it. Like it would definitely not shock me if he ends up becoming the guy to dramatically outperform that kind of draft status and general ranking. Like, what did you think of him as a player, independent of how much they gave up to go get him?
Yeah, I think, obviously you can see the tools. It's a big, fast, receiver who has really good hands. I think I saw that he didn't have any drops last year. I think for the most part, so I didn't write him up because I do top 100. I didn't write him up, but I kind of have a tendency to sort of write guys off if like their production is just really not standing out whatsoever. I'm a big believer in, if you didn't produce in college, you're probably not going to produce in the pros most of the time. Obviously, that's not a hard and fast rule, but generally speaking, it's how I kind of weed guys out. Is these athletic guys are kind of a dime a dozen. There's been a million spark gods or guys that are super, super athletic, super explosive, and then they don't end up doing much in the pros just because they don't have the sort of technical nuance, I think. But yeah, I think I'm the same as you. You see that pick, you see what they gave up for him, and then you're like, okay, well, I better go back and like try and put myself in their shoes. What did they see? Obviously, I think it's just a big guy, great hands, stretch the field, and develop them in their system. And they're so good at developing guys within their system that, again, honestly, it wouldn't surprise me that much if I end up looking wrong on this. But I think just from a process point of view, this is how you have to do grades. You can't just say, oh yeah, this GM is really smart, therefore he's going to be a great player. You kind of just have to like put your foot down on some things, and this to me looked like terrible process. Maybe it ends up working out for him.
No, I'm afraid of Brad Holmes. He's going to come after you. Tesla's going to have 4 touchdowns in the NFC Championship, and he's going to be like, Danny Kelly from the Ringer didn't like this.
He's going to
he's 2 threes now.
He's going to feature him in that offense. He's going to put an edict down from on high that you have to get this guy involved. So I can just dunk on all these idiot like draft graders.
I am always fascinated by that when the massive trade up. So that was the one in this draft, and then Woody Marks, the Texans gave up next year's 3rd for a 4th this year. Like when you need a guy that bad, would you have taken him in the 2nd and you're just playing the board? Like, do you have him valued so highly?
Yeah.
I mean, Tesla to get 2 threes next year, Woody Marks a 3 next year, and then the other one I brought up, the video going around from last year with the Jets and Joe Douglas, he was calling up to get Malachi Corley in like the 40s or whatever it was in round 2, and he didn't get him until early round 3 because nobody would trade with him.
Right.
Like, how much do you have to value one player at that point in the draft? That just one player, because there's usually that's where things start to become a little more homogenized as far as boards go, right? Like there should be 10 players you're happy taking there, and so teams are just locked in on one.
Yeah.
What is it about that one player that makes you have to have him, and you're willing to give up multiple picks in the future for it? That's just always fascinating to me.
And that's a great summation of kind of like how I look at things. It's like, you know, you can have guys that you really like, but getting too hyper focused on one player, I feel like, is always gonna, not always, but it can lead to bad decision making, you know, in the draft, where you feel like so convicted on a guy that you have to move around and go get him. And I mean, and you know, I think I gave the Jets bad grades for last year because I wasn't a huge Malachi Corley guy. I think I had him in the 80s or 90s in my rankings. I'm just like, he's just a run after the catch guy. They basically spam him on these, you know, screens and things like that. And I don't see a ton of like high level route running. He wasn't super strong at the catch point. In fact, he was really poor at the catch point. Just going off of my memory of scouting him. And so I don't know. This is the beauty and why we love the draft, I think, just because two people can look at the same player. And I don't think these people are stupid. I think they're very, very smart to have gotten in their position. But two people can look at these same players and talk to the same players and look at their production and look at all the variables that everybody looks at and come away with like completely different conclusions. It's just so funny how that works. And you know, and that's why, honestly, like I was doing an impassioned defense of draft grades on my podcast the other day, because I'm like, we do all this work where we're studying them. We might as well just go off of what our opinions that we formed were, and then we can judge these GMs for what they did versus what ours did. So, you know, it's like, that's the fun of it.
There is nothing worse than the people that spend their like the last 3 months consuming draft content and then go, draft grades are ridiculous. We can't tell anything for the next 3 years. You're like, well, what is the point in everything we've just done then?
If you were really dedicated, Danny, you would, on the day after the draft, you would say, here come my 2022 draft grades. Here they are.
You're right,
3 years later, we have the information now. These guys have been in the league for 3 years. Here come the draft. And you'll get the same. The SEO is the same. It still says draft grades. It just has the wrong year on it. So you'll still get the views, but you'll be like, I know exactly what happened with Trayvon Walker and Aiden Hutchinson now. We know who the winners and losers actually are. That's what you should do.
A draft analyst with integrity would, instead of the day after the draft, be grading that draft. They'd be grading the draft from 3 years ago every year.
Yes. And Sam and I can make fun because we don't have to do grades anymore. We're not tied to grades. We don't want to. We just say, here's what Danny Kelly said. Here's what Danny said. We make fun of Thor all the time because he gives everybody D's and F's. It's great. We just reference everyone else's grades, and we're not on the hook. And we just,
I mean, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. That's the type of strategy you want there. Just you know, exactly. I'm trying to get there. I'm trying to get to where you guys are. You know, where I can just make fun of other people's draft grades, but
blame everybody else. Yeah.
It's not us. It's them.
Yeah. But I love it. I think, you know, obviously it's kind of a slog writing draft grades throughout the draft, but I just think it's silly. Like, we talk about games before they happen. Are we not allowed to talk about things that we think about a team, what we're predicting what's going to happen? I just think it's like, well, we can't talk about a game till it's over because we don't know what's going to happen. I don't know. I think it's silly.
I love it. Any other draft takes you just want to unleash here as we wrap up?
I'm looking at the Packers. What did you guys think of the Packers thing? Because I think the Matthew Golden, obviously I'm not like anti Matthew Golden, but it's just the Packers taking Matthew Golden, then Savion Williams, just to an already completely just super deep skill position group. I mean, they got like 7 or 8 guys, I think, that can contribute, and that's been one of their strengths over the last couple of years. I just found that curious. I don't know. I thought they needed, and Josh Jacobs, I think, said this too. They needed a true number one, and I didn't really see Matthew Golden as that. And so, and I also think Matthew Golden is a perfect example of trying to figure out how much weight to put on tape and late season production versus overall body of work in college. You know, if you're looking at, I do a lot of fantasy stuff too. So I'm like listening to some of the fantasy guys and their analytical profiles, and like Matthew Golden's analytical profile is atrocious. It's one of the worst first round receiver profiles in terms of the production that we've seen in a long time. And so I think this is like just a good meta view of like how hard it is to do the draft, because I'm like, I thought he was like exciting and he certainly made some great plays. But I think people got maybe a little over their skis with him, and maybe I end up being wrong. Maybe he's a superstar in the NFL, because I did see a little bit of, you know, like a Stephon Diggs style player there, but I just think that's like a perfect example of like, how much do we weigh the analytics versus the tape versus, you know, who he is as a person, it's just very, very difficult, I think. So I'll take your guys' answer now, because I've been rambling, but I thought the Packers were just an interesting one.
Sam, you love Savion. Go.
Well, yeah. So with the Golden thing, I mean, I think there were a lot of players this year, it felt like, where there was something missing, right? I think that's why some people were seeing this draft as not that strong. I felt it was definitely not as strong as in terms of blue chippers, but I thought it was pretty deep overall. But there were so many players where it's like, okay, this guy's got 4/5 of what we're looking for, but the fifth is like a massive red flag. And it was like all the edge rushers were like that. A bunch of the wide receivers were like that. There was a whole bunch of guys that fit into that category. So you had to talk yourself into in the first and the second round with the wide receivers, like, which thing do we decide we don't care about this time? Is it the statistical profile? Is it the athleticism? Is it which thing are we going to ignore because we need the player? And then Savion, like, he's the classic example to me of heart over head. My head says there's no chance that guy works out, because they just don't. Like, these athletic freaks who have no position in the NFL and hasn't been spectacular at anything, they have an awful track record. But the second I turn on the tape, I'm like, I want that guy on the team. I want him. Somebody else's job is to figure out how it works. Just put him on my roster and figure it out later.
I love that. That's perfect, because he's another great example of just kind of how nuanced and difficult it is to do evaluations in the draft, because I felt like he was a walking contradiction in a lot of ways. He had some pretty atrocious drops, like he like concentration drops, really, I thought, where he would start to try running before he get the ball and drop it, like these really easy, just little swing passes. But then he also was incredible on these contested catch situations. I think he had one of the highest contested catch winning percentages or whatever. It's like he caught like these crazy plays over 3 or 4 defenders at a time, and he's just like, I'm like, there's something there, because he has incredible ball skills, yet he has these easy drops. What do we make of that? And then, of course, there's the idea that he's raw, but then he also played 5 years in college, and I just don't know like what to make of him. He was obviously very fun to watch, like a very loose, fluid, explosive athlete. Wouldn't surprise me if he does pan out in like a Cordero Patterson type of role. I actually thought he was like pretty good running the football, like as a running back.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see how they utilize him. But he's a very fun player.
He was meeting with running back coaches on his 30 visits and everything. So like the NFL seeing that too. It's funny, some of the themes in drafts. Remember a couple years ago, it felt like everybody was like undersized for their position. We had Tank Dell, and you were even a Zay Flowers. Like, I like this guy, but he's just small relative to the position. This year, it feels like the inexperienced 5-year players, or just a lot of inexperienced players, whether it's Darian Porter, or Williams, guys that just don't have a ton of snaps, but it's like this dude's, or Tyler Shook. I mean, they've been in college for 12 years, but they haven't played a ton of football. What do you do with that combination?
Yeah. And it's, I think we're starting to see, it's like, the results are lagging, and we're starting to see it now, but like the effects of the COVID year and the NIL stuff and guys playing in college for way more years than you normally would see. I think now we're starting to see guys come out where we wouldn't have even really paid attention to them. They would have gotten undrafted, or because they had to come out like a year or two earlier.
Right.
So yeah, it's I think it's just, we're seeing kind of a new era of drafts. Just there's a lot of interesting layers to the draft, just because of like what happened with the COVID year and all that.
I think COVID is over now as far as players being extended. It might be a couple stragglers. The next one's going to be, you have maybe more polished. You're going to have like bigger sample size of college now. You're going to get 4,000 snap guys and guys that have 4 years, 5 years of starting experience legitimately. And then maybe just fewer underclassmen that we have to evaluate. And they better just be the best if you're coming out early, so I think that's what we'll see trend wise.
Or you're going to get, just not necessarily you're going to get some people like that who have a ton of sample size and a ton of career, but you're also going to get a bunch more of these guys, a little bit like Darian Porter, right? Where they've played like 64 times, where they've only actually got 7 starts under their belt, or it's going to be like 4 colleges deep, but their career is 9 starts long. Like they only broke out right at the end after being through 4 different programs at the age of 24. And we still have to figure out, like, what the hell are we talking about with this kid?
Yeah. The other thing is, and we could probably go on like this forever, but I think it's interesting with all the transfer portal stuff now where you can just transfer. You don't have to set out a year. Everybody can just go to wherever they want. It's like unlimited free agency. I love it. And there is obviously, I think a lot of players will use that as a springboard to like make themselves go higher in the draft. But there's also now I've heard people saying like, he didn't transfer. What's wrong with him? You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like, why didn't he transfer to a bigger school? And why didn't he go to Alabama? Why didn't he go to Ohio State or whatever? And
Ashton
I'm like,
Jetty, why are you still at Boise
Right.
State? Quinyon
Perfect
Mitchell, why are you
example.
still at Toledo?
And you know,
you
for
gotta
my
sort
team,
through that.
like the Seahawks, like Gray Zabel, you know,
Yeah.
why didn't you transfer if you're so good? You would have had an opportunity to play against higher level competition. Maybe he's just not that good. And then you find out later he did get like 6-figure offers from big time schools. I don't know which ones, but and he just wanted to stay because he was loyal and he wanted to finish it out with his teammates, which again, that's a plus. That should be a good thing, right? But it kind of can be looked at either way.
Loyalty and just wanting to stay where you're happy is now a negative when it comes to drafting.
It's just it's the Wild West now with college football, and so we're gonna have to figure out where we stand on a lot of these things. I think it's gonna be fun.
I love it. I think overall it's going to be fun for football, even if it's. I mean, college is a little crazy right now with unlimited free agency, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
Danny, tell everybody where they can read your grades and listen and read all your stuff.
Yeah, we've got team grades. We've got first round grades. We have my big board at nfldraft.theringer.com, or you can just go to the Ringer and it'll be up there right front and center. And yeah, just check that out. And then check out the Ringer Fantasy Football Show. We are switching back to the, we were the NFL draft show during the draft season. Now we're going back to Ringer Fantasy Football and talking about fantasy, talking about dynasty stuff. And we have a lot of fun during the off season. Then obviously just cover fantasy during the season.
Do you pick your favorite 100 players to face the gorilla? Is that what's coming up this offseason?
We honestly had talked about that. It's like so stupid but fun.
It's like every NFL podcast in May and June is going to be fighting gorillas. Here we go.
Exactly.
We should have a competition to see who comes up with the best team, and let's have a bracket for the best 100 against the gorilla. We could do something with this.
Hell yeah. I mean, the options are limitless. Yeah.
All right, Danny. Appreciate it, man. Let's do it again sometime.
All right. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
All right, we are excited to be joined now by Lance Zierlein, NFL Network, NFL.com. Lance, how you doing, man?
I'm doing well. How you guys doing?
Doing good.
Doing great. Just coming up from air after the draft here. So let's just talk about it again. Right at the top, what did you like? First off, how do you evaluate drafts? Well, I'm always curious about this. When you're looking back at a draft, do you look at teams that drafted players that you liked, players you had graded highly, their process? What do you like to look at when you're going back evaluating how teams drafted?
It's a good question. I'm not first of all, I hate draft grades. I know that in our business, editors want that. People click on them. It's big business. Mocks and draft grades. The idea of grading a test that's never been taken is just so ludicrous to me, but it's what we have to do. Luckily, I'm kind of out of that business. I guess they've got Chad Reeder and I think Eric Edholm do that now. So that's good. So, and I say that because just because I like somebody, it doesn't mean it's a good pick. Just because I don't like somebody, it doesn't mean it's a bad pick. So I like to, we all have different opinions, and it'll play out in 2 to 4 years. So we'll find out. But to your point, I kind of like to see, like, I have a general sense of what the quarterbacks look like, running backs, every position. So I like to take a team's needs that they have and the priority needs, they know their own priorities. I'll have my own opinion of it. But to answer your question, I like to take a look at the needs they have and then how did they address those needs relative to the depth of a certain position in a certain time frame. So like the Bears, for example, they got Colston Loveland at 10, and then they came back in the second round and got Luther Burden. Look, Luther Burden, I don't know, maybe he's high maintenance or something to fall out of the first. But to me, I think that was really good value for what they need in terms of a young quarterback. They're all in with trying to make the quarterback work. So they went with the Dunze last year. Now they've added another pass catcher and another pass catcher. In free agency, they attacked the offensive line. So I thought rather than getting a lesser offensive tackle at 10 or even in the second round where they were, I kind of liked, for example, that's the way I would look at that in the early part. But then I consider day 3 almost a separate draft. So day 3 is for the nerds like us who love draft all the way down. And so, I consider what you do day 1 and 2 to be one draft, and the more immediate help, how you're helping your team right now. And in day 3, I look at, I guess, kind of differently. I've never really thought about it, but I absolutely do, because once we hit day 3, now I start looking at, I become a little bit more opinionated about some of the players, to be honest with you. The first 100 picks, the first 3 rounds, we've all got them in different categories. And day 3, I become a little bit more biased about guys that I kind of have a leaning towards. And then, that's kind of where I start to think, oh, I like what they did. And that's based on, who I like. The first 3 rounds, I kind of look for what you did relative to what's going to help your team quickly and what type of players you got, if that makes sense.
On those day 3 picks, are you targeting sort of guys that you think have upside to be, day 3 gets interesting because I think you get several categories of players, right? You get like the good football players that are not great athletes. You get the great athletes that aren't good football players yet. And everyone's got something missing, and that's why they fall into day 3. And you can sort of almost see which teams covet the different things. What would your leaning be on those day 3 players? Are you targeting a specific type of player, or does it just vary by whoever it is?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know if people really think that way, but when you do this as often as we do, you start to see patterns develop. And like you said, Sam, you can see who covets traits, who looks at middle rounds as like really addressing special teams, because some teams you can, if you really know who the special teams players are, you got to go kind of deep to figure that out. But usually it's going to be linebackers who test really well, like Teddy Buchanan, for example, from Cal is an example. But really, a lot of times, linebackers late in round 3, all the way into round 5, these are going to be guys who are considered core special teams players and good solid backups who might be able to step in and start for you. So I think when you start seeing teams draft those testers in the middle rounds, a lot of times you check to see if there's special teams value at that. And then a lot of times in the 4th round, as well as where your developmental players, your developmental offensive linemen are going to be in the 4th round. So the way I would approach it, like in this year's draft, it's different. I would have waited until the 5th or 6th for a running back, which is kind of what happened. Once I saw how the quarterback draft was going, I would have, you kind of have to wait. And that's the living, breathing draft. Like you aren't sure what direction it's going to go in. And then once we got to the 4th round, you realize, man, you just have to wait on these quarterbacks because none of them are starters anyway, in my opinion, in day 3. So other than Sanders, obviously, I think has a chance to become an NFL starter. But I would, I'm kind of from the school of upside, swinging for upside once you get into round 6 and 7. 4th and 5th are legitimate backups and special teams type players. Once you get into 6th and 7th, I'm looking for speed. I'm looking for physical traits. I want to scratch off a lottery ticket and have a guy turn into a much better player or a better player than where I drafted him. But 4th and 5th, I consider those still very valuable in terms of building out the hub, maybe not the core, but the hub of your 46 to 48 man.
I think we all agreed that this draft had a lot of, quote, developmental-like quarterbacks. I thought there was a big chunk of them. I thought they all had at least something to offer. Did you have a favorite developmental quarterback or a favorite couple that you were looking at?
I usually do. There's a couple of interesting ones. Like I think Max Brosmer is who he's going to be. I don't think he was drafted either. I think he may have been an undrafted free. I think Quinn Ewers obviously has some traits to work with. I like the Michigan game was really good for him this year, the Alabama game last year, but you keep having to hang on to those same 2 games. Like it's at some point you say he's injured all the time and he's not durable enough. And that's a question. But I think Quinn Ewers, to me, he's a little bit limited in terms of reading defenses. I think there's some limitations in terms of him playing chess against defensive coordinators. So that limits him a little bit. I tell you a guy who's really interesting to me that wasn't drafted and it's because his 23 tape was so much better than 24, and it's Brady Cook from Missouri. I thought he's terrible this year, just terrible, and it hurt Luther Burden. But if you go back and look at his 23 tape, I mean, he's big, he's got a good arm, and I mean, he's got a live arm. He's big, he has a live arm, and then his ability to, throw to all three levels in 23 was kind of intriguing. So I don't, this level of inconsistency from one year to the next has to be extremely alarming, but he's an undrafted free. So, he's a guy that I would take a swing on in camp and see if I could stash him on a practice squad. If he looked good in camp, maybe stash him on a practice squad. But the rest of them, I think I think Sanders has really developmental stuff that's out there, but we didn't expect him to go in the fifth. So I don't look at him as really a developmental quarterback, but he is now. I mean, now he's in that category. Dylan Gabriel, to me, is just a smart backup caliber player who has a chance in the right offense. But out of the rest of them, I think Will Howard's really limited. I think Riley Leonard is just kind of, limited in terms of as passers. Do you have one in mind yourself? I can't really – I mean, to me, Quinn Ewers has some of that just because we haven't seen him at his best and at 100%, Steve, over the last 2 years. So, I mean, he would be the guy that I think I would point towards.
So we've been Sam and I were both fans of Dylan Gabriel. Our friend Mike Renner was a fan of Dylan Gabriel.
I like him.
Yeah.
I like him. I think he's a safe backup if he's in the right offense.
I mean, honestly, I watch short quarterbacks, and I always want to dismiss them, and I did that throughout the year with Dylan Gabriel. I'm like, he threw a red zone pick against UCLA. But when I watched him, I was like, man, arm, movement skills, wants to win from the pocket. I liked a lot of Gabriel, and I think Milroe's just the most interesting one, just because of obviously the roller coaster ride that was his season, and I think that's a pretty good fit. Putting him in Seattle, where he at least has one season to sit, and more likely more than one.
Where do you guys fall on? So talking to some teams, I mean, it's definitely, it's not a popular thing to talk about publicly, but in terms of the general reaction to it, but teams have talked about if he doesn't work at quarterback, you got an insanely talented elite athlete, and we're going to find a way to get him on the field and put the ball in his hands. Where do you guys fall in terms of how long you give him as a quarterback, and and I think Bucky Brooks and I were on different sides of this coin. I think Bucky likes him as just, let's see how long we can develop him as a quarterback, sit him. And I'm like, get him on the field and put him in some kind of role. I don't care how packaged plays near the goal line on third downs, as a Taysom Hill-like player, even as a decoy. I want to get that guy on the field as quickly as possible, even if I'm developing him as a quarterback.
Yeah, I think we brought that up on draft night, that you not only can you develop him from the sideline, teach him behind Sam Darnold, but you can definitely get a package of plays ready to have that guy on the field at the same time as Darnold, or at least have him rotate in. I would be all for that. I think, look, he's too good an athlete to just ignore completely and leave stashed on the bench or on the sideline in case of injury. The first question is trickier, though. Like, right, if you think he could be, a running back, if it doesn't work out at quarterback, how long do you give him at quarterback before you bail on you and you say, okay, you're completely switching, you're now a running back? That's a tough one.
Because I'm a draft nerd and watch all those old drafts, and I was watching the 2000 draft recently, and here was the debate, Lance. The Steelers were picking, and the pick was either going to be, they're going to take Plaxico Burress or they're going to take Chad Pennington. And whichever one they take, Cordell Stewart was going to do the opposite. So if they take Plaxico Burress, then they're heading into year 6 of developing Cordell Stewart, or they're going to take Chad Pennington and Cordell's going to become the playmaker. That's how long they gave the Cordell experiment of QB/receiver, legitimate / right, his nickname, which I thought was hilarious. But yeah, I mean, I'm with Sam. Like, you can give Milroe the package for a little bit. I would give him a couple years to develop a quarterback, because the payout there is just incredible. Like, the payout of hitting on a quarterback, if he figures it out 3 years from now and, tidies up the pass game and accuracy and everything, would be outstanding.
And I think it's a sliding scale. Like, Steve, I know you're a baseball fan, or you played, and Sam, I don't know if you're a baseball fan or not, but there is, there's so in the analytics world and sabermetrics, it became, there was there's been some changes, and I remember, it's always been about putting the bat on the ball. You want to put the bat on the ball. You want to put the ball in play. And then the Houston Astros in 2015, when they started their extended run, that was the very beginning of it. They went from being this 100-loss team to they made the playoffs. They beat the Yankees in a wild card game, and then they moved on and they lost to the Royals in the next series. But what they had was they had a team that could hit home runs but struck out a lot. And I think what Jeff Leno did, who was hugely analytically driven, was he said, okay, I know what we're going to do when we're really good, but for right now, let's try to hit as many home runs as possible, and we're not going to worry about the strikeouts. We're going to approach it a little differently. And I remember thinking about that when Lamar Jackson was drafted, because he had a live arm, wasn't always the most accurate. We know how explosive he was, but he was certainly a more viable passer, in my opinion, than Jalen Milroe is right now coming out. And I remember when I was writing him up, I just thought, you can live with strikeouts with Lamar Jackson because he hits so many home runs. And that sliding scale of if you are a home run hitter, you can strike out more, meaning, it is that sliding scale. We'll take less accuracy because you will extend series with third downs with your legs, potentially. Right. You will take, you'll take a 3rd and 5 and turn it into a 65-yard touchdown run. And so I think Jalen Milroe deserves a longer leash, and you grade him on a little different scale than other quarterbacks because he has an opportunity he may not be as good a passer. You want to get him to a functional level passing because he can do incredible things with his legs because of his speed and that ability, back-breaking third down conversions, back-breaking long touchdown runs, things that really demoralize defenses. And if you can make explosive plays as a quarterback with your arm, which he can push the ball down the field with, he can really throw it with distance. And then, of course, we know what he can do with his legs. I just think you grade him on a little different scale if you're Seattle, and then you have to figure out, okay, is this good enough for us to win a Super Bowl? You want to get to a point where you say, are we going to have to get a better passer? Does he pass good enough? He's functional, but can he take that next step up? But Seattle's not in a big rush. I mean, I think it's a great spot for him to go to personally.
Yeah, I completely agree on Milroe and that, the spot, at least in Seattle. You mentioned Luther Burden earlier on to the Bears. Are there any other either teams that you liked, what their draft, their takeaway, or any specific players, any specific fits that you really liked?
I liked what the Patriots did. I thought the Patriots had a really good draft. I'm not the biggest Will Campbell fan in the world, but I think he's solid. I think he's extremely tough. I think mentally he changes helps to change their locker room a little bit. And he really is a fit with what Mike Vrabel likes to do. And
how much you're an O-line guy, so how much does the arm length really matter for Will Campbell?
Oh, it matters. It's interesting. Let me turn this off. Hold on a second. Why does my website NFL.com just automatically blast? At least ESPN has figured out to mute it.
Is it ever your face? Is it ever you? You try to log on?
No, it's never me. It's always Daniel Jeremiah. It's the worst.
Stealing all the spotlight.
No, Steve, I think it's a big deal. I think it can be a really big deal. I know people try to minimize that, and I've told the story. My dad, who coached in the league for years and years, said anyone who says arm length doesn't matter never coached offensive line. And it's because, and interestingly enough, Chris Long said something about arm length being a major factor. He is a defensive lineman. He said when a guy has shorter arms, you can have a lot more success against them. I think it's a big deal because what it does is it minimizes long arm guys, a 34.5 to 35-inch arm player. What they're able to do is that's a larger margin for error. Two different things it allows you to do. It allows you to redirect. So if a guy's beat you around the edge, those long arms allow you more room to redirect a guy off the rush path and around the pocket, for example, or around your quarterback, where short arm guys can't really do it. There's only so far they can go. And so they really need to be really strong too. If they're going to have shorter arms, you have to have a lot of strength, a lot of upper body strength. And the second thing is you have such a small margin for error as it pertains to strike timing, where in pass pro especially, but it can be run blocking too, where you've got to – so the name of the game is to get your hands on the other guy first. Well, that means you've got to have great spatial awareness in terms of how far away a guy is before you can throw your punch. You got to be clever and tricky with your hands. You got to feint. You got to throw a lot of different tricks at them. You got to kind of be a junk baller if you're a pitcher, where you've got to change speeds on them. You've got to change eye levels. If you're working, if you think of it like a strike zone, that's how you do. Your approach has to really be varied. Your timing of your punch has to really be good. You have a much smaller margin for error. So he's sub 33 arms. 33 and a half is considered short by NFL standards. Will Campbell's less than 33. So what's going to happen is I thought on tape, like the Landon Jackson game was a bad game for Will Campbell. It's a really bad one. And I think that Will Campbell gets in a lot of scramble situations where he loses, if he gets behind early, he kind of loses his poise a little bit and he goes into scramble mode, but he's elite in scramble mode. Like he can recover he's got incredible feet, loose hips. He's got this great athleticism and an agility where he can recover, but you don't want to be in recovery mode all the time. So I think it is a factor. And I think he has to be really, really fine with his timing, with his hand placement, and, the technique in general is just going to have to get a lot better with him. But he has really heavy hands. So that's a huge advantage, because if the timing is right, man, those hands can really stall out a pass rush.
We've been saying the last couple of years that it feels like the NFL is kind of collectively getting smarter at the draft, at free agency, at a lot of different areas. And you kind of come out of these and you don't have the drafts anymore where you're like, this draft is ridiculous. Like they've used some absurd board that doesn't bear any resemblance to anything else. I hate everything about this draft. Now you're sort of finding just a couple where it's like, okay, don't love what they did here, but I'm nitpicking. Who were some of your least favorite drafts this year?
Well, a couple of them. So it's weird because, like I said, my drafts are 1, 2, and the first and second day, and then the third day is a separate draft. For the Houston Texans, I love Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel. Ariante Ursary, just my personal opinion, but I thought he would go on second. I think he's just kind of an average starter, but that's fine. They need a tackle. I don't really have a problem with that. Jalen Smith, in my personal opinion, that felt way too early for Jalen Smith, and I know in other people's personal opinion, but we have to see how that plays out. But that felt really early. Graham Mertz in the 6th round for the Texans. I thought Graham got better, a lot better from Wisconsin to Florida, but I don't see enough to think that he's going to be the next Davis Mills in terms of a legitimate NFL backup that you can go to for a 3-game stretch if you need to. Those are some things that I thought bothered me a little bit from a team standpoint. I didn't love what Jacksonville did in terms of trading up for Travis Hunter. And I saw Gladstone, their general manager, his comments that, this is how we're going to be. We're not afraid. We're going to do this and that. But, you just gave up a tremendous amount to go get a corner wide receiver who's not even 190 pounds. Like, physically, there's a real concern about durability if you play him at the cornerback spot. And if you're playing him at the wide receiver spot, I would argue that, yes, I think he's the best wide receiver in this draft. But for what you gave up, that seemed kind of crazy. I think Caleb Ransall and Wyatt Milam are just, I think they're kind of average for where they were drafted. But I do think they can both become starters. Jack Kaiser in the 4th, low traits, everyone talks about his intelligence, and I love all that stuff. And I will say I missed on Drew Tranquil, so another Notre Dame guy. Maybe Jack Kaiser can be like that. I did like what they did with Tootin, but I thought I didn't love the way they approached going from 5 to 2. I was just not a fan of that with their draft. And then I think it was – so Arizona is an interesting draft. Boy, they took a swing here. Walter Nolan, for me, is the best defensive tackle in this draft, but there was a reason a lot of teams had him off the board. His immaturity is a big, big concern for a lot of teams. So Walter Nolan was your first round pick. Then you followed up in the second round with Will Johnson. Once again, high ceiling, great ball skills, great instincts. The teams thought he was slow, and then he never ran. He never proved he could run. So now you drafted a corner that great ball skills, but you're not sure if he can run. Then in the third round, you got Jordan Birch, who has tremendous traits, really good pass rusher. But, I mean, to me, he just doesn't show up as a run defender. He doesn't seem to have any grit as a run defender, any toughness. He just kind of lets guys who should not be blocking him. He lays on blocks too long. I want to see him play with more fire and intensity. So you got three really high side players. And Birch, by the way, has some real draft pass rush stuff to him. Like, I think he could end up being a 290-pound terror off the edge. So that's certainly a big advantage. But I looked at this. Denzel Burke had that horrific game against Oregon. He was a 5th-round pick, and I've got somebody who was wrote his own code, has created his own computer vision that runs athletic scores on all these players, and he said Burke has some of the most troubling for a man-to-man defender in terms of change of direction stuff that he looked at from all the cornerbacks this year. And so that concerns me. Now, Burke, if you take him and if you say, hey, he's going to be a corner, we're going to run zone. Well, then that helps Will Johnson and Denzel Burke. That makes it a little bit easier. But I just think there was a lot of – and I like Cody Simon in the 4th round, but I think Arizona took some real hit-or-miss swings, and it could end up paying off in a massive way for them, or we could end up coming back to this and saying, man, there were telltale signs to their first 3 picks, and they kind of – they just kind of ignored it and stacked them all together in one draft in the first 100 picks.
Love it, Lance. Appreciate the down the center analysis there. So how many scouting reports did you end up writing here on NFL.com this year?
This year, 450. I used to go to like 500. My old editor, when I first started, he just wanted 500, even though only 260 players get drafted. My editor now, and over the years, we kind of, we shrunk the workforce a little bit at NFL media, like everybody in the media space has. And so I've got really one full-time editor, and he said, and he's been my editor for a long time. And he said, look, you don't have to get to any magical number. Just write up guys who are drafted, because if you don't, then you have to write them up afterwards. And I had to write up 5 players this year, which was fine. It's just simple stuff, and it's gone. But so I felt less pressure to try to get to this magical 500 number. So I wrote about, like I said, 440 something, and then after I added the 5, it ended up being about 450. But that, I'm up to about 5,500 write-ups since the 2015 draft when I started with NFL Media. That's just with NFL Media. I'd done it before then too. So I don't know about you guys, but it's kind of like I can't remember movies I watched in 2023. I looked at, I'm watching, what's it with Jeffrey Wright? The movie with Jeffrey Wright in 2023, and I said, God, I saw this movie and I liked it, but I got to watch the trailer. I'd forgotten what the story was even about. And it's like that with draft too. I remember prospects from 15 for my first mock draft. My first draft, I can remember the write-ups, the strengths and weaknesses. Boy, you throw somebody from a week ago or 2 weeks ago or a month ago, I can't even remember who they are. So I really have to focus in when I write a player up, because I know when I go back to my notes, I want it to be accurate, and I can't cut any corners, because they have to tell me exactly what I need to know when I go back to it.
I'm glad we're not alone, because Sam and I found all of our player references are from like 10 to 15 years ago. It's like we need updated examples, right? We need to update them. So,
I want to ask you guys about this. So this is something, and I think we had this discussion a few years ago when we did the podcast in Indianapolis. I don't know if this topic came up, but this is something I've been meaning to talk about. So you guys' backgrounds at PFF kind of brings this to light, and from an analytical standpoint. So the NFL is fluid. The way we approach it is fluid. There have been changes in terms of the value of linebackers, value of your nickel corners now are bigger guys who stop the run. Pass catching tight ends obviously have way more value than they used to when it was more about wide tight ends. 2 tight end sets are valuable. So when you look at running backs, so I've made this argument. If you have a special running back, a guy that you think is, when I say special, has to be a plus running back. I like the idea if you are a certain team, like you've got to have a certain type of team to do this. But I kind of like the idea of taking a running back in the first because I get 5 guaranteed +1 franchise +1 franchise. The idea of not paying a second contract but getting 7 years out of a running back or even 6 years, to me, I almost feel like that's more valuable than taking the 4 years. And then like you haven't squeezed the juice out of the orange. And so now you're stuck with paying second contracts. And there's so few of them that actually work out with running backs. I kind of like the idea of running back with a 5-year option and then those franchises stacked together and turning it into a 6 or even 7-year deal. I kind of wanted to get you guys' thoughts on that, or if you've even talked about that concept.
Yeah, I actually haven't thought about it like that way. Omarion Hampton's a good example this year, right? Because we were sort of saying, I think everyone pretty much universally says Ashton Denty's special, so he's worth the first round pick. And then when you get to Hampton, or when we were talking about Travion Henderson before the draft, or the next wave, it's like, are any of those guys really worth the first rounder? And we're focusing on it in terms of opportunity cost, or, you know, all those other elements. But it's a good way of thinking about it, because I said before that as our understanding of kind of running back dynamics and worth develops, the one thing that I kind of settle on is I don't know that I want to pay a second contract for a running back. Like, we can talk about where to draft them. We can talk about franchise tags. I think the one thing I would try and avoid doing is giving pretty much anybody a second contract, because it's so rare that you get value out of that deal. That's where the big money is. I would want to get away from that. So I kind of like the idea of getting that extra year and then potentially one more buffer year of the franchise tag. And at that point, you can be pretty sure that the smart move would be to walk away.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that isn't talked about enough, but I'm acutely aware of because I do sports talk radio, is, you know, fan engagement. If you have a running back that's doing really well after 4 years and they're 26 years old and you get rid of them, and somebody else signs them because you philosophically want to get away from them, it causes a lot of duress in your own fan base. They think you're cheap, right, that you won't do what it takes to win. Then you give a running back a second deal, and you're like, man, this sucks. We're sitting here paying this amount of money for a guy, and you know, he's, you know, the Todd Gurley deal, for example, and you know, he's done. The more I've seen it develop, the more I realized I would much rather have 6 years of a running back than 4 years of a running back. That's how I look at it. If he's good after 4, unless your idea is we're always going to cycle him out, we just don't believe in it, then I'm drafting 3rd round or later. I'm not even drafting in the 2nd round. I'm drafting 3rd round or later. I'm going to keep my opportunity cost down. I'm drafting running backs every 2 years probably, and I'm just going to keep it. And that's fine too, but you better have, you know, a special quarterback. You better have a really special quarterback. So there's different ways to skin that cat, but I was curious if you guys had thought about that, because I'm just on the mindset that, look, it's probably not going to get to 2 franchises because there will be a lot of tension in your building with that running back. But 6 years versus 4 years, I'm on board with 6, because I'm with you, Sam. Once we get to a 7th year, like, historically, it's not great.
Yeah, I think it's a good angle there, Lance. The other part that I bring up and brought up on our show a few different times is the price tag. So for Ashton Denty, I don't know if you've looked at some of the actual surplus value aspect of it and everything. Like, he steps in as the 13th highest paid running back at the 6th pick, where if you took an edge rusher, they're 40th, or if you took a defensive tackle with their rising cost, it's 37th. So that's all part of that math too. It's getting, if you got the 3rd edge rusher or the 3rd defensive tackle, say, but he's getting paid 37th at the position versus the best running back in the draft, and he's getting paid 13th. So I like your idea, though. You're throwing the 5th year and maybe a tag into the whole equation, and that's what it all, like, those are the types of decisions you have to sit there and figure out where you land on it.
Yeah, and with, you know, I would say, and remember, if it doesn't work out, you don't give the 5th year option. Right. I mean, it's really easy. Is you'll know in the first 3 years if it's working out or not. You just don't have to give the 5th year option. But, you know, it does come at an opportunity cost of another player at another position of higher priority. So I recognize that. And I think there's only certain, you know, I think Hampton's interesting with the Chargers because they've got a quarterback that they're going to be paying really good money to moving forward. but Jim Harbaugh is more likely to run that hammerhead offense.
Oh, yeah.
And honestly, I don't know that I've ever seen a more violent runner who took more violent collisions than Omarion Hampton. I mean, I know he's never been hurt in college, but he took violent collisions, front flips after hits on his legs. And so I really wonder, like, I think they're going to run him hard. I think he is going to have, car crash carries from time to time. That may be one of those things where I want 5 years out of him. You may want to keep him after 4 years, but I'm not sure by year 7 that he isn't substantially different, or even year 6 substantially different than he is in year 3, just because of his running style.
One thing we can agree on, the star when watching a Marion Hampton run was always Willie Lampkin up front, right? I mean, we were all on the same page watching that dude block.
Yeah. So I was watching him coming back from I took my son. My son is at Alabama, and he does stuff on the recruiting side there, and also goes to business school. But I drove with him because it's a long drive from Houston, and I got a flight out from Birmingham. But I still have my tape. I still got to always be watching tape and writing guys up. And so I downloaded some out of my tape. I downloaded Omarion Hampton carries, all of his carries, and I was going to watch it all on the flight back. And it was probably like 40%, 35 or 40% of the way through where I'm like, golly, that is a good block by number, I think he's 53, I think was Lampkin. I'm like, holy crap, this guy's small. I said, but man, what a block. 2 more plays, I'm like, oh my God, that right guard just got up on that linebacker and sustained him. Like, he single-handedly kept that run alive for Omarion Hampton. And then I stopped watching Omarion Hampton. Like, I watched Omarion Hampton, but he was my second watch. My first watch was the right guard, and then my second watch was Omarion Hampton. And I had no internet, right? So I had no internet because it was a short flight. So United's whatever, so I couldn't look him up. I didn't know who he was. And I couldn't wait for him to land. And as soon as I landed, I texted Mike over at North Carolina, Mike Tannenbaum, not Mike Tannenbaum,
Lombardi,
right-hand man for Bill Belichick.
Lombardi.
Yeah, Mike Lombardi. And I said, hey, who is this right guard coming back for you guys? He said, no, he was a senior, Willie Lampkin. I said, Mike, this is not that he cared because he was leaving, but I said, he's the best guard tape I've seen so far. And I'd already seen Booker. I'd already written up Booker. I'd written up Donovan Jackson. I'd written up all of them. I said, the best guard tape, and that's not hyperbole, the best pure guard tape. If my dad or an offensive line coach were watching and they didn't care about traits and they just wanted to see sustain, body control, core strength, angles, ability to get in the second level and get to cutoffs, ability to play out in space on pulls, ability to play with leverage, to bend, like everything, inside hands, everything that I could point to on my checklist I have here on the wall for offensive linemen. Check. He checked them across the board. Had he been 6'4", or even 6'3.5", probably 312 pounds, he's probably a first-round pick. Like, that's how highly, and my guess is you guys did. You couldn't watch him and not think that highly. Like, oh my gosh, I'm watching a guy that's punching way above his weight class.
He was awesome to watch. And then couple reps at the Senior Bowl, he's playing center, locking up a 350-pound Cam Jackson and everything, and throwing TJ Sanders to the ground, who's a second rounder. I mean, yeah. I'm in on Willie. I would have taken him day 3. Rams.
I would have too. Yeah. I would have taken him in the 7th round to make sure I have him. We're going to run him at backup center and fullback. And we're just going to – because he's going to get on top of anybody he blocks, and they're not going to like it.
Yeah.
I mean, he's going to make that team over there at the Rams. So good for the Rams, good for Willie. But I thought he might go in the 7th just because somebody said we're turning him into our version of Patrick Ricard, and we don't want anyone else to have him. I thought he might go in the 7th.
I love it. Glad we got a little Willie Lampkin talk in there. So, hey, Lance, go check out all Lance's scouting reports over at NFL.com. Not 500. He skimped a little this year, but he's got plenty for you to read. Thank you, Lance. Appreciate it, man.
Thanks, guys. I enjoyed it.
Thanks, man.